While working a late-night shift, an employee notices her boss alone, crying as he looks at an old photo. To her surprise, the baby in the picture is her, leaving her full of questions about their hidden connection. The office was a place that seemed designed to make people feel small. Towering windows framed the city skyline full of ambition and isolation. Rows of glass-walled conference rooms stood like silent witnesses to deals, arguments, and betrayals that happened long after sunset. Emily Carter knew these halls better than most. For the past 3 years, she had been the invisible heartbeat of Wallace & Company, the administrative assistant who worked late without complaint, ensuring everything ran smoothly while others went home to families, dates, or empty apartments with more appealing views than hers. At 27 years old, Emily had grown accustomed to the sterile glow of office lights, the hum of vending machines, and the soft, mechanical exhale of the building's air conditioning system. In truth, she preferred these silent hours to the chaos of the day. During the day, people noticed her, but only just enough to issue orders or make small talk they would not remember. At night, she belonged to no one, and no one belonged to her. Her life was simple by design. Work, home, repeat. Her social circle was as thin as the edges of the sticky notes she used to organize her boss's calendar. She had a few acquaintances, people who might grab a drink on a Friday night if she pushed for it, but no one who truly knew her. Not really. Not the parts that mattered. Not the gaps in her history, or the blank pages where childhood memories should have been. Her adoption had been finalized when she was barely old enough to walk. The family who took her in did their best, or at least they thought they did. They provided a roof, rules, and responsibilities. But love was rationed in their home, and questions about her past were met with tight smiles or heavy silences. Over time, Emily learned not to ask. Not about the scar on her chin from an accident no one could describe. Not about the name on her original birth certificate. Not about the people who had let her go. Her adoptive parents had moved to Florida 5 years ago, content to send polite holiday cards and the occasional birthday check. They had done their duty, they would have said, and now she was someone else's responsibility. Mostly her own. Tonight was no different from any other night. She had stayed behind to prepare quarterly reports that her boss, the formidable Richard Wallace, would need first thing in the morning. Wallace was the kind of man who commanded rooms simply by entering them. He spoke rarely but decisively, wielding words like scalpels. His reputation in the industry was as solid as the concrete beneath the building's foundation. Ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. A man without weaknesses. Or so everyone thought. Emily had seen little of him beyond brief directives and the occasional curt nod. She doubted he even remembered her name without checking her file. Still, she did her job with diligence. If he noticed, he never said. As the clock inched toward midnight, she moved through the deserted office, gathering papers from the printer near the executive suites. Her heels echoed in the silence, a metronome ticking off the moments of her solitary existence. She turned a corner and paused. Through the thin glass of Wallace's office door, she saw a light on. That was unusual. He never stayed this late, not unless there was a crisis. And tonight had been routine. Profits up, clients content, no fires needing extinguishing. Curiosity rooted her in place. She had learned long ago that lingering where she was not wanted was a dangerous habit. But something about the scene before her struck a dissonant chord. Wallace sat at his massive desk, head bowed, shoulders slumped in a posture so unfamiliar it took her a moment to process. The man looked broken. In his hand, he held a small, worn photograph, the kind you did not keep unless it meant everything. His thumb traced the edges slowly, almost reverently, and then, to Emily's disbelief, Richard Wallace began to cry. Not loudly, not with the desperation of someone seeking comfort or attention. These were silent tears, the kind shed by people who had held on to grief too long, who had buried it beneath layers of work and armor until it found its way out in the quiet hours when no one was meant to see. She should have walked away. She told herself this even as she stood there, heart racing, breath caught halfway between concern and embarrassment. Whatever demons haunted him were not hers to witness. But something deeper stirred beneath her professional detachment, an ache she did not understand. Without warning, Wallace set the photograph down and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. His shoulders shook once, twice. Then he drew a slow breath, squared his spine, and reached for a folder atop a stack of papers. The moment passed. The armor returned. The man she recognized replaced the ghost she had glimpsed. Emily retreated as silently as she had come, clutching the reports to her chest as though they might steady her. Back at her desk, she stared at her computer screen, the numbers blurring together. Questions crowded her mind, pushing logic aside. Who had been in that photograph? A wife? A child? A mistake that haunted him? None of it made sense, and yet she could not shake the image of Malone in that cavernous office, mourning something he could not name aloud. By the time she shut down her computer and slipped on her coat, the halls were empty once more. Wallace's light was off, his door closed. Whatever storm had passed through his soul was locked away again, hidden behind the polished veneer of the man she thought she knew. But Emily knew better now. Even the strongest men bled in the dark. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was how closely that photograph, that grief, was tied to her own missing pieces. How soon the answers she never dared to seek would come crashing into her carefully constructed life. Tomorrow would come, and with it, everything would begin to unravel. Emily Carter returned to the office the following night with a sense of unease she could not fully explain. The events of the previous evening lingered in her mind like smoke after a fire, impossible to dispel and harder still to ignore. She had not spoken to anyone about what she had witnessed. Not that there was anyone in her life to confide in. Her routine was too ingrained, her world too small. Still, the image of Richard Wallace, undone by silent tears and a faded photograph, haunted her with persistence that defied reason. She told herself it was none of her business. Her job was to file reports, schedule meetings, and make herself useful without becoming visible. Curiosity, however, was a stubborn force. It pressed against her professional instincts, urging her to look deeper, to understand why the most powerful man in the company had looked so devastatingly human behind his closed door. The office was quieter than usual when she arrived. Even the security guard at the front desk seemed half asleep, offering her a distracted nod as she signed in. She made her way upstairs, the elevator groaning in protest as it carried her to the 27th floor. Her heels clicked softly on the marble as she walked toward her desk, her eyes drifting, as if by habit, to the CEO's corner office. The light was on again. A flicker of something close to dread settled in her chest. This was not normal. Wallace's habits were predictable to a fault. He arrived early, left late, but rarely stayed past 10. Twice in a row was enough to unsettle her. She told herself to ignore it, to keep her head down and focus on her tasks. Instead, she found herself moving toward the office, her steps careful, her breath held. Through the glass, she could see him. He sat in the same chair, his posture rigid this time, his face drawn in harsh lines of exhaustion and something deeper, fear perhaps, or guilt. The photograph lay on the desk where he had left it, its edges catching the light as he turned it slowly beneath his fingertips. His eyes, sharp and calculating by day, seemed hollow now, fixed on something only he could see. Emily hovered just beyond the threshold, her presence unnoticed. She should have walked away, but something compelled her to stay, to bear witness to whatever unraveling was taking place behind that polished door. "You should go home, Miss Carter." His voice, though soft, carried through the glass like a summons. She startled, caught between retreat and apology. Slowly, she pushed the door open, her fingers light on the handle. "I did not mean to intrude, sir. I thought everyone had gone for the night." His eyes lifted to meet hers, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or resignation. Apparently not everyone. "I forgot something on my desk," she lied, the excuse feeble even to her own ears. He nodded, a gesture devoid of belief. "Of course. That explains it." She lingered, unsure why she had not already excused herself. The silence stretched between them, uncomfortable and fragile. "You saw me last night," he said suddenly. It was not a question. Emily felt her throat tighten. "I did not mean to. I thought you were alone." I believed I was." His mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile in another lifetime. I suppose privacy is a luxury I can no longer afford. I did not tell anyone. He gave a quiet, humorless laugh. Who would you tell? No one pays attention to the night girl, do they? The word stung more than she expected, though she could not say why. She had built her life on being unnoticed, had thought herself content with the anonymity her position afforded. Yet hearing it spoken aloud, dismissed so casually, made something sharp and defensive rise in her chest. I should leave you to your work, she said, retreat already shaping her next step. Wait! The command was gentle but firm, the authority in his tone impossible to ignore. Come in. Close the door. Against better judgment, she obeyed. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing them in together with the dim light and the weight of things unsaid. I suppose I owe you an explanation, he said, gesturing vaguely to the photograph as if it might speak for him. But I find myself unprepared to give it. You do not owe me anything, she said quickly, though the lie tasted bitter. Perhaps not. He leaned back, the leather chair creaking beneath his shifting weight. But it seems the universe disagrees. Her gaze fell to the photograph. In the faint light, the image resolved itself into clearer detail. A younger man, Wallace, though less hardened by time, holding a baby with a soft, round face and a small scar beneath the chin. A scar she knew well, because it mirrored her own. The recognition landed like a blow. That is me. The words escaped before she could temper them. His silence confirmed what she already knew. How? She demanded, stepping closer, drawn by a need she could neither name nor resist. Why do you have a picture of me as a baby? How could you possibly? I have wondered how long it would take you to ask that question, he said. His gaze was steady now, the hesitation burned away by inevitability. I kept that photograph for over 27 years. It is all I have of the daughter I lost. The air thickened between them, heavy with implications too vast to comprehend in a single breath. My daughter's name was Emily, he continued, each word deliberate, a name I gave her before she was taken from me. Her heart lurched against her ribs, a frantic, disbelieving rhythm. Taken? I do not understand. No, you would not. How could you? He pressed his palms flat to the desk, as if anchoring himself to the present. My wife, my late wife, made a choice I could not stop, a choice her family enforced with all the cruelty and influence they possessed. They said I was unfit, that I would ruin her, that I would ruin you. Emily's mind reeled, pieces of her life falling out of place and scrambling to reform. You say you are my father? I am saying I never stopped searching for you. His voice broke then, a fracture in the carefully maintained facade, and that the world is far crueler to some men than it pretends. She sank into the chair opposite him without realizing she had moved. The office, the city, the entire night seemed to recede, leaving only this impossible conversation suspended in fragile quiet. I was adopted, she said slowly, as if stating it aloud might change the shape of the truth. They told me nothing. They said there was nothing to tell. They lied, or they did not know. I searched for years, but records vanish when people with enough power want them to. I thought you were lost to me forever, until your resume crossed my desk. You knew who I was when you hired me. It was not a question. I suspected. I had to be sure. I had been watching, waiting for some sign, something undeniable. His gaze drifted to the scar on her chin. Tonight, I have no more doubts. Emily pressed her fingers to the mark, as if touching it might confirm her existence. Why now? Why say this now? Because I am tired, Emily. Because time runs out for all of us, and I cannot bear to leave this world without you knowing you were wanted, that you were loved, even from a distance. The confession settled over her like ash. She wanted to feel anger, betrayal, some righteous fury for the years lost. But what rose instead was a hollow ache, a sorrow too old to name. I do not know what to do with this, she admitted. You do not have to do anything, he said. But know this, you're not alone anymore. Not unless you choose to be. She left his office hours later, the photograph clutched in her hand. Outside, the city stretched indifferent and vast, But something inside her had shifted irrevocably. The questions had only begun, but for the first time in her life, she knew where to start looking for answers. Emily did not sleep that night. The photograph burned in her mind as fiercely as it did in her hands. Hours earlier, it had been nothing more than an object collecting dust on Richard Wallace's desk, a private relic of grief she had stumbled upon by accident. Now, it was a mirror reflecting a truth too large to fit neatly into her tired thoughts. The baby in that picture, the small child with a scar beneath her chin, was her, and the man holding her, younger but unmistakable, was her father. She turned the photo over and over as if the answers she needed might be hidden between the layers of old paper and faded ink. But there was nothing written there. No date, no message, only the weight of a history she had lived without knowing. The following morning, she arrived at work before sunrise. The office was still cloaked in silence, the lights dimmed in a night mode, casting long shadows over desks and chairs like ghosts reluctant to leave. She had not intended to come in so early, but staying home had proved impossible. Every corner of her apartment seemed too small to contain her confusion, every room thick with questions that refused to let her breathe. At her desk, she stared blankly at her monitor, the screensaver cycling through images of mountains she had never climbed and beaches she would never visit. The cursor blinked in the corner, like a pulse waiting to be revived. She made no move to touch the keyboard. Her phone buzzed against the wood, a vibration sharp enough to startle her. A message from Wallace's assistant appeared, brief and impersonal. The CEO wanted to see her at 7 o'clock sharp. Alone, she spent the next hour composing herself, smoothing the edges of her shock beneath layers of professionalism. By the time she stood outside his office, her expression was neutral, her posture flawless. Only her clenched hands betrayed her. "Come in." His voice, even to the closed door, held the exhaustion of too many sleepless nights. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Wallace sat where she had left him hours before, the same weary tension lining his features, the same photograph now placed deliberately between them on the desk. If he had gone home at all, it did not show. "I imagine you have questions," he said. "I have too many to count." She took the seat opposite him, folding her hands in her lap as if to keep them from shaking. "But I suppose the first is the simplest. Why now? Why hire me only to keep this from me? It was not supposed to happen this way." His gaze dropped to the photo. "When your application crossed my desk, I thought it was coincidence. A cruel one, perhaps. Your name, your age. I requested your file out of morbid curiosity. When I saw your birth records, I knew, but how could I approach you? I feared what you might think, that I was a madman or worse, a liar trying to manipulate you. You could have said something sooner. And risk frightening you away before I understood who you had become? Before I knew if I deserved the right to speak these truths to you at all." He shook his head. "No, I thought I could keep my distance. That knowing you were alive and well would be enough. But it was not," she said, her voice flatter than she intended. "No, it never is." Silence settled between them like fog, thick and difficult to navigate. Emily broke it first, leaning forward to tap the edge of the photograph with one careful finger. "Where was this taken?" "In the hospital, the day you were born." His mouth tightened. "They allowed me one photo, one visit, and then you were gone." "Gone where?" "A private adoption, arranged by people who never wanted me to find you. I fought them. I hired lawyers. But money and power win in the end. And I was not the man I am now. I did not have the resources to fight harder." She studied his face, searching for signs of deception and finding none. Only sorrow, only the hollow ache of years lost. "My adoptive parents never spoke of you, never hinted there was more to my story. They would not have known. Sealed records, confidential arrangements. The law was made to protect secrets, not people." He exhaled slowly. "I only found you again because you placed yourself within my reach. A miracle I never dared hope for." "Do you believe in miracles?" she asked, not unkindly. "I believe in regret, in second chances when they come wrapped in pain." His fingers traced the photograph's border as if it might anchor him to the present. And I believe in fixing what I can before I die. The words settled heavily between them. She did not know how old he was, mid-50s perhaps, or older, worn down by years of fighting battles no one had witnessed. But she saw the toll etched in his skin and the lines around his eyes. Time was not a friend to either of them. What do you want from me? The question escaped before she could soften it. Nothing you are unwilling to give. His answer was immediate. Not forgiveness, not affection. I only wish you to know the truth, to decide for yourself what it means. And what is the truth exactly? That you were never abandoned by me, that I searched for you, loved you from a distance, carried your absence like a wound that refused to close. Her throat tightened. You could have lived without telling me. Why bring this into my life now? Because I owe you that choice. Because secrets rot from the inside. And because I looked at you and I saw the child I lost still living beneath the woman you had become. She closed her eyes against the sudden sting of tears. This changes everything. It changes nothing you do not wish it to. He leaned back, exhaustion softening the harsh lines of his face. You may walk away from this office and never speak of it again. I would understand. I would grieve, but I would not blame you. And if I do not walk away, then we begin again. Slowly, carefully, as strangers, perhaps as something else if time allows. Strangers, family, words that no longer seem separate, but intertwine in ways she could not yet unravel. I need time, she said at last. You shall have it. She rose then, the photograph still in her hand, her heart still too full to name what she felt. At the door, she paused, glancing back at the man who had shaped her life from the shadows. Thank you for telling me the truth. He inclined his head, a gesture more reverent than formal. Thank you for listening. Back at her desk, the world felt unchanged and yet irreversibly different. Her co-workers filtered in, oblivious of the tectonic shift that had occurred before their arrival. Emails pinged, phones rang, meetings filled calendars with demands and deadlines. And beneath it all, Emily sat with a photograph and a future she had never imagined. That evening, she walked the city streets with no clear destination, letting the motion soothe the restless thoughts unraveling inside her. The photo weighed down her bag, but not as heavily as the questions it carried. Who had her mother been? What kind of woman surrendered a child against her father's will? What secrets remained buried beneath years of silence and loss? She paused at a coffee shop window, watching strangers move through routines that mirrored her own. Their lives seemed untouched by the kind of revelations that left a person untethered. And yet, she envied them less than she expected. There was power in knowing where you came from, even if the path had been broken and bloodied. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Wallace himself. Simple, almost tentative. Whenever you are ready to talk again, my door remains open. She did not reply. Not yet, but she did not delete the message either. Some bridges were not meant to burn, no matter how fragile their construction. When she returned home, she placed a photograph on her nightstand beside the framed images of friends and colleagues who did not know this version of her story. The baby in the picture stared up at her, wide-eyed and trusting. A child who had been loved, even if she had never known it. Emily lay down without turning off the light, the city's pulse humming beyond her window. Sleep would come, eventually, and with it, a morning unlike any before. Tomorrow, she would begin to search for the pieces still missing. Not because she needed to fill the gaps for anyone else, but because the truth had already begun to reshape the woman she thought she was. The days that followed unfolded in slow, disjointed fragments, as though Emily were moving through a world slightly misaligned with the one she had always known. Tasks that once seemed mechanical now demanded conscious effort. Emails, reports, the steady rhythm of office life all blurred beneath the weight of what she carried inside. She found herself watching Richard Wallace from a distance, as though trying to reconcile the man she had known from afar with the man who now claimed to be her father. Every glance, every word exchanged in passing, seemed tinged with a layer of meaning invisible to everyone else. Still, they did not speak again. Not immediately. The photo remained on her nightstand, a silent witness to her sleepless nights. His message remained unanswered, though she reread it more times than she could count. Whenever you are ready to talk again, my door remains open. The words offered no pressure, only possibility. And yet, the way what they implied pressed on her chest like a stone. It was not until a Thursday evening, long after the office had emptied, that she found herself standing outside his door once more. Her hand hovered over the polished handle, hesitation tightening in her throat. She had rehearsed a dozen beginnings for this conversation, each one discarded beneath the pressure of reality. In the end, she pushed the door open without ceremony, stepping into the quiet that waited on the other side. He looked up from his desk, unsurprised. If anything, he seemed relieved. "I wondered how long it would take," he said softly. "I needed time." Her voice held steady, though her heart did not. "You still have it. I am grateful you are here, but I do not demand it." He gestured to the chair across from him, the same one she had occupied during their last conversation. "Please, sit." She did, though her posture remained guarded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I have questions," she said, "and I want answers. Not later. Now." "Then ask," he said. "I will answer as best I can." She drew a slow breath, choosing her words with care. "Why did my mother give me away? You said her family forced it. But why? Who is she? What kind of person agrees to something like that?" The question landed between them with the weight of years behind it. For a moment, he said nothing, only studying the lines of her face as though mapping familiar terrain beneath unfamiliar light. "Her name was Margaret," he said at last. "Margaret Fairchild. She came from money. Old money. The kind that builds its walls high and its secrets higher. We met when we were both too young to understand what it would cost. She loved me, I believe, once, but love is fragile in the face of fear. What happened? She became pregnant. Her parents, they saw me as beneath her, a liability. I had nothing, no future worth mentioning. They told her she would ruin her life, her name, her inheritance if she stayed with me. They gave her no choice they would accept. She signed the papers because they told her she must, because they convinced her it was for the best. And you?" Her gaze sharpened. "What did you do?" I fought with everything I had. But everything I had was not enough. They locked her away during her pregnancy. I was not permitted to see her, to speak to her. The first time I held you was also the last. Until now." His hands closed around the edges of a file on his desk, the knuckles white with memory. "I was not even told where you were sent. The adoption records were sealed by court order. Money ensures silence, and they had plenty. I left Chicago for a time, built myself into something they could not dismiss. But by then, you were gone. You built an empire." Bitterness crept into her tone despite herself. "And still, you cannot find me." "No," he said quietly. "Not until fate placed you in my building, in my life again." She looked away, her gaze settling on the skyline beyond his windows. "Do you know what it is like growing up with questions no one will answer? To wonder if you were a mistake no one wanted to claim? To carry pieces of yourself that never fit together? I have wondered every day what it was like for you," he said. "I imagined 100 possibilities. None of them gave me peace. Well, now you know. It was lonely. It was confusing. It was nothing like what it should have been. I am sorry." The words were simple, but not empty. They carried weight. "I cannot change the past. I can only offer you the truth now, however late it comes." Silence pressed between them again. Emily traced the grain of the desk with her fingertip, grounding herself in something tangible. "You said her name was Margaret," she said. "What happened to her?" "She married another man, a suitable one by her family standards. They kept her close, controlled. I learned she died 5 years ago. Cancer. I doubt she ever forgave herself. I do not know if she told her husband about you. About me?" Emily absorbed this in silence. A mother dead before she could ask the questions burning beneath her skin. A past closed off by death and secrets. "Do I have?" The words faltered. "Are there others?" "Family, not ones who would welcome you. The Fairchilds have no interest in opening doors better left shut. My side, my parents are gone. A brother estranged long before you were born. No one who would matter to you now. Except you. The words tasted unfamiliar on her tongue. If you will have me, he said. If not, I understand. She rose. The conversation's weight settling into her bones. I need space to think, to decide. You shall have it, he said again. Whatever you need. At the door, she paused, glancing back at him. One more question. Of course. Why keep the photo on your desk all these years? Why not hide it away, forget it ever happened? Because forgetting was never an option. His gaze met hers, steady despite the ache beneath it. Because love, even unspoken, demands witness. She left without another word, the photograph burning against her memory. Outside, the night wrapped the city in indifference, but Emily walked with purpose now. Not answers, perhaps, but clarity. The man behind the title, behind the company's empire, was no longer a stranger. He was something Messier, something real. She found herself walking without aim, letting the streets carry her forward. Her thoughts chased themselves in circles, about Margaret, about Richard, about the life she had lived and the one she might yet build. There was no guide for this, no map to navigate from orphan to daughter, from stranger to family. By the time she returned home, exhaustion settled over her in a heavy cloak. She placed the photograph back on her nightstand, beside the unanswered message on her phone, beside the question still too large for sleep to contain. Tomorrow would come, and with it, more choices than she felt ready to make. The following days stretched thin with tension, yet Emily could not bring herself to confront Richard Wallace again so soon. Their last conversation had left her reeling, her mind tangled in 1,000 questions without answers. She moved through her routines in a daze, executing her tasks with mechanical precision, while her thoughts remained elsewhere. The photograph stayed on her nightstand, a quiet sentinel over her sleepless nights. At work, Wallace maintained his distance, as though sensing she needed the space to process what had been said. He no longer lingered near her desk or sent cryptic messages requesting meetings. It was as if they had silently agreed to retreat into their separate corners, each waiting for the other to make the next move. For Emily, the silence became both a relief and a source of further unease. She found herself avoiding the executive floor whenever possible, taking alternate elevators, adjusting her schedule to minimize the chances of encountering him in the halls. But the weight of what she now knew pressed in from every direction, refusing to be ignored. Her curiosity burned hotter with each passing hour. Late one evening, after the office had emptied and the building settled into its nighttime hush, Emily stood in the records room deep in the heart of the company's archive. Officially, she was there for quarterly compliance reports. Unofficially, she was looking for something else entirely. She had no clear plan, only a gnawing instinct that the answers she needed were hidden somewhere beneath layers of paperwork and time. Wallace's connection to her was no longer in doubt, but the circumstances remained a blur of half-truths and omissions. If her adoption had been arranged with such secrecy, if records had been buried and her existence erased from his life so thoroughly, then somewhere there had to be a trail. The archive smelled of paper and dust, the air heavy with the weight of forgotten decisions. Shelves stretched high, packed with files labeled in precise, cold typeface. She moved methodically, pulling folders at random, scanning dates and names with growing frustration. Nothing jumped out at her. No smoking gun wrapped in a manila envelope waiting to be discovered. Then, tucked between financial audits from nearly 3 decades ago, she found it. A slim folder marked with a code she recognized from her own employee file. Her birth name. Not Emily Carter, but Emily Fairchild. Her hands trembled as she slid the folder free and carried it to the small reading desk beneath the flickering fluorescent light. Inside, the papers were sparse but damning in their clarity. Legal documents stamped with the seal of the Fairchild family's law firm. Adoption agreements signed not by her father, but by Margaret Fairchild and her parents. Letters exchanged between attorneys detailing the terms of the arrangement, the confidentiality clauses, the efforts taken to ensure no connection would be drawn between Richard Wallace and the child given away. And beneath it all, a final document, A court order sealing the records indefinitely, filed at the behest of the Fairchild estate, signed, dated, and executed with brutal efficiency. Emily stared at the pages until the words blurred. Her life had been packaged, processed, and hidden away like a transaction no one wanted to remember. She was so lost in the paperwork that she did not hear the door open until his voice broke the silence. "I wondered if you'd find your way here." She turned sharply. Wallace stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You knew this was here," she said, the accusation barely contained. "I suspected you would look eventually. Curiosity runs in our blood, it seems." He stepped closer, his gaze dropping to the papers spread before her. "Those documents were not meant for your eyes, not even for mine. You hid them well." "I did not hide them. I kept them because I needed to understand, to remind myself of what was taken from me." Emily pushed the papers away as though their touch burned her. "You said you fought for me. These don't look like someone who fought. They look like someone who signed away a child without protest." His jaw tightened. "I signed nothing. Those signatures belong to people who held more power than I did at the time. People who believed they could erase me from your life with enough money and legal maneuvering. I was given no choice. You had a choice. You could have done more. I was 22, penniless, and shut out by a family with ties in every courtroom that mattered. They took you before I could even speak to a judge. They buried the evidence because they knew I would never stop searching if I thought I had a chance. And yet here you are, running a company larger than their entire empire ever was. You could have found me sooner." His gaze softened, not with pity but with something heavier. "I looked. Believe me, I looked. But records vanish when men like them want them to. And when I did finally find you, what then? I could not storm into your life with demands and explanations. I watched. I waited. I tried to understand who you had become before I brought this burden crashing down on you. The truth settled between them, raw and unfinished. I thought knowing would help," Emily said, her voice thinner now. "But it only makes everything messier. Truth often does." She gathered the papers, slipping them back into the folder with trembling fingers. "What do you want from me now? Am I supposed to forgive you? Accept you as my father after all this time? I want nothing you are not willing to give. I told you that. But you deserve to know the full story, even if it casts me in a poor light. Consider that accomplished." His mouth lifted in something that was not quite a smile. "If it helps, I do not forgive myself either." She left the records room without another word, the folder clutched tight against her chest. In the elevator, her reflection stared back at her, pale and drawn, eyes wide with exhaustion. By the time she reached her apartment, dawn pressed faintly against the horizon. She placed the folder beside the photograph on her nightstand. Two pieces of a puzzle she had never asked to solve. The secrets were out now, laid bare beneath legal jargon and faded ink. But knowing the truth did not make it easier to hold. She poured herself a glass of water and sat in silence, watching the light grow slowly across her floor. Somewhere beneath the tangle of her thoughts, a question waited she could not yet voice. What did it mean to find something you had never known was missing, only to realize you could never reclaim the time lost? Tomorrow would come, and with it, more choices, more truths waiting in the quiet spaces between words. For now, she let the weight of it all press down and held herself together the only way she knew how, alone. Emily returned to the office the next evening with a purpose she did not entirely understand. She told herself it was for closure, that she only needed to see how far the roots of this deception reached before she could finally decide what to do with the truth Richard Wallace had handed her. Yet as she sat beneath the stale hum of the overhead lights, staring at the sealed folder on her desk, she knew closure was a word people used when they were too afraid to admit nothing would ever truly make sense again. Her fingertips traced the edges of the folder, as if daring herself to open again. Inside lay the pieces of her history, signed in ink and sealed in bureaucracy. The adoption papers were clear, the court orders final, the letters between attorneys cold and impersonal. They told her the story of a transaction, of a child passed from one set of hands to another beneath the weight of money and reputation. What they did not tell her what she needed to know most, was why Richard Wallace had clung to this evidence for so long, why he had kept it hidden even from himself until she forced it into the light. The building was quiet around her, emptied of its usual noise and movement. Night brought a strange sort of honesty to places like this. Walls seemed thinner. Secrets pressed closer to the surface. She stood, folder in hand, and moved to the halls without thinking, her steps drawing her inexorably toward the executive suite where it had all begun. Wallace's office door was unlocked. That alone sent a ripple of unease through her. The man was meticulous to a fault. He locked everything. Yet now the door opened beneath her hand without resistance, revealing the darkened expanse of glass and steel beyond. She did not turn on the light. Instead, she crossed his desk, her movements slow, deliberate. The photograph was gone. In its place, a stack of papers neatly aligned beside a locked drawer. Her eyes caught on something beneath the edge of the desk blotter, a corner of yellowed paper sticking out where it did not belong. She hesitated only a moment before pulling it free. What she held was not like the other documents. This paper was older, thinner, its edges frayed with time. A memo, typed on a machine decades out of date, bearing the letterhead of a company that no longer existed. It referenced a file, confidential, internal use only, regarding the Fairchild estate and an unnamed dependent. A string of numbers followed, a code that meant nothing to her on its own. Emily frowned, flipping the memo over, searching for context. There was none, but the number, that sequence of digits and letters, seemed familiar, not from her recent search through the records room, but from something older, buried deeper. She remembered seeing a matching code once in passing, listed on an archived inventory log of off-site storage, holdings the company maintained for legacy purposes. Heart pounding, she replaced the memo exactly as she had found it and left the office as quietly as she had entered. Back at her desk, she pulled up the digital archives, fingers moving swiftly now, driven by instinct more than reason. The inventory logs were tedious, sprawling spreadsheets of outdated assets and forgotten files. But there it was, hidden among them, the same code, assigned to a storage unit in a warehouse on the city's outskirts. Archived over 20 years ago. Contents: legal documents, medical records, personal correspondence. Access restricted. Restricted to whom? The log did not say. Emily sat back, staring at the screen. The discovery gnawed at her. Wallace had spoken of secrets buried by others, of records hidden beyond his reach. But this file, this storage, belonged to the company. To him. Or at least it did now. She could leave it alone. She could walk away from this, lock the knowledge in a drawer alongside the photograph, and pretend it changed nothing. But the choice felt hollow. She had come this far. She would not stop now. The warehouse sat beneath a crumbling overpass. Its sign faded, its gates rusted but still functional. She used her employee credentials to gain entry, explaining herself to the lone security guard with a fabricated story about audit compliance. He barely looked up from his newspaper. Inside, the air hung thick with dust and disuse. Rows of shelves stretched into darkness, each lined with identical boxes marked only by numbers. Her code led her to a corner untouched for years. The box she pulled down was heavier than she expected. She carried it to the nearest table and pried it open, half expecting disappointment, half dreading what she might find. Inside were files bound in brittle string, folders labeled in handwriting she did not recognize. The first she opened contained medical records, her own, birth certificates, vaccination logs, hospital reports from a facility she had never heard mentioned before. A facility tied to the Fairchild name, now long since shuttered. Notes scribbled in the margins referenced treatment, observation, recommendations. None of it made sense at a glance. Beneath the medical records lay letters, personal anguish letters, written by Margaret Fairchild. To Richard, pages upon pages of ink and grief and desperation. I do not know if they will let me send this. I do not know if you will ever see these words. But I have to try. They say it is for her good, for her future. They tell me I will forget. That time will smooth the edges. But I cannot forget her. I see her face in my dreams. I hear her crying in the silence. I was wrong. I should have fought harder. I should have run. Forgive me. The letters continued, dated sporadically across months, years. Some tear-stained, some almost unreadable with age. All of them addressed to a man who had never received them. Emily read until her eyes burned, until the warehouse seemed to shrink around her with the weight of revelation. Her mother had not abandoned her willingly. She had written, pleaded, fought in the only way she could, and someone, perhaps her family, perhaps the very men who orchestrated her adoption, had ensured those letters never reached their intended recipient. At the bottom of the box lay one final envelope, thicker than the others, unopened, addressed in a trembling hand, Emily Fairchild, wherever she may be. Her breath caught as she broke the seal. Inside was a single letter, dated only a year before Margaret's death. If you find this, it means you have searched. It means you are old enough to understand and brave enough to want to. I cannot know the shape your life has taken. I can only hope you have been loved, that you have been safe. I failed you once, and I carry that shame like a stone in my chest every day. I tried to find you. They told me you were better off not knowing me. They told me lies, and I believed them because I was afraid. Not of you, never of you, of them, of what they could take from me, from you. If you read this, know that I loved you. From the first breath, from the first cry, I loved you beyond reason, beyond fear. I never stopped. I never will. Forgive me. Tears blurred the words as Emily folded the letter with trembling care. She placed it back in the envelope, back in the box, as though honoring its place among the ruins of a story too long untold. Outside, the city loomed indifferent and unchanged. But within her, something shifted. Anger, grief, understanding tangled in her chest, impossible to separate. She returned the box to the shelf, locking away again. Not forgotten, not ignored, preserved. A truth too heavy to carry all at once. Back in her apartment, she placed the letter beside the photograph on her nightstand. Two ghosts finally reunited. A mother's love, a father's grief, a daughter's choice. Tomorrow, she would go back to Richard Wallace. Tomorrow, she would ask him the questions she had not known to ask before. Not about the past, but about what came next. Because the past was no longer a mystery, only a wound. And wounds, if given time, could heal. When Emily stepped into Richard Wallace's office the next morning, she did not wait for an invitation. She did not knock. She closed the door behind her, turned the lock, and placed a faded envelope from the warehouse box squarely on his desk, without saying a word. The look on his face shifted slowly from surprise to recognition to something deeper, a weariness that seemed older than the building they stood in. "You found it," he said. Not a question. A statement wrapped in resignation. "I found everything," she replied. "The letters, the medical records, the file you never wanted anyone to see." She paused, watching him. "The letter she wrote to me." He sat back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath his movement as if it, too, carried the weight of the years pressing down on them. His hand hovered over the envelope, but did not touch it. "I thought it was lost," he said quietly, "or destroyed. I searched for that file more times than I can count. Even after I gained control of this company, I could not find where they had hidden it. It was buried with everything else they wanted forgotten, along with her letters to you. Letters you never saw." "I believe that," he said. "Margaret's parents were meticulous in their cruelty. They would not have left such threads loose if they thought I might find them. She tried to find me," Emily said. "She wrote to you, to me. She fought in the only way she could." He met her gaze then, and she saw the pain etched into the lines of his face. Pain she now understood in a way she had not before. "I never doubted her love for you. I doubted her strength, perhaps. I doubted her family's mercy, but not her heart. You never told me her name until I forced it from you. You never told me any of this. Why? Because I believed knowing would only hurt you. Because I fear it would make you hate me more. I do not hate you," she said. "I do not know what I feel, but it is not hate. That is more than I deserve." She ignored the self-loathing in his tone. "What I want now are answers. Real ones. No more evasions. No more half-truths. You owe me that much." He inclined his head, accepting her terms. "Ask. Why keep the file at all? Why keep the letters, the documents? Why not destroy them if you thought they would never help you find me? Because they were all I had of you, of her, proof that we existed once, beyond the reach of lawyers and threats. I kept them to remind myself I was not mad, that you were real. And now that I am here, they are yours. They always were." She sat down, exhaustion catching up to her now that the adrenaline had burned away. "Tell me everything. From the beginning. Spare me nothing." He did, slowly, carefully. He unfolded the past like pages in a long-forgotten book. How he had met Margaret at university. How their love had been naive but genuine. How her family had intervened with cold precision the moment they discovered her pregnancy. How he had been barred from the hospital until after her delivery, allowed only a single moment with his daughter before being escorted out under threat of legal action. How he had spent years chasing shadows, hiring investigators, hitting dead end after dead end as the Fairchilds tightened their hold on the narrative of Margaret's life. "I built this company because I thought success would give me leverage," he said. "Because I believed power could undo what power had done. But by the time I had enough to challenge them, they had already erased the trail. You were gone, adopted by strangers, hidden behind closed records and sealed court orders. And you gave up? I never gave up. I simply stopped hoping. Until you appeared. Until your name crossed my desk. I thought it was a mistake. A coincidence. But then I saw your file. The birth date. The scar. And I knew. You watched me for 3 years before saying anything," she said. 3 years. I watched to be sure. To protect you, in a way. To understand who you had become. I did not want to destroy the life you had built if you had no wish to know the man who failed to protect you once already. Emily studied him. Not the CEO, not the figure of authority she had known, but the man beneath, worn, wounded, grasping for redemption in a world that rarely offered it. "I do not know what I want from you," she admitted. "Not yet, but I know I want the truth. All of it. There is little more to tell. Only that I never stopped loving you, never stopped looking, and that I will never ask for more than you are willing to give." She leaned forward, resting her hands atop the envelope. "Tell me about Margaret. Not the facts. The person." His expression softened, the lines of grief easing beneath the weight of memory. She was brilliant, fierce when it mattered, though too easily silenced by those who claimed to love her. She had a laugh that made people look twice, a mind sharper than anyone gave her credit for. She wanted to be free. They never let her. I think she hoped you would inherit what she could not claim for herself. And did I? You are here, asking questions they never wanted answered. I think you have more of her in you than you know." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable now, but contemplative, a space where something fragile might begin to mend. "What happens next?" she asked. "That is for you to decide." "I want time," she said, "to think, to feel, to figure out if I can make room for you in a life that never included you until now. You shall have all the time you need." She rose, gathering the envelope, the conversation winding to its natural close. "At the door," she paused. "You said once that you never stopped looking for me." "I never did. I believe you now." She hesitated, then added, "I am not ready to call you my father. Not yet. I understand. But I am ready to stop running from the truth." He smiled then, small and tired but genuine. "That is more than I hoped for." She left without looking back, the envelope secure beneath her arm. Outside, the city moved around her, oblivious to the quiet revolutions unfolding behind closed doors. Emily walked without direction, letting the weight of the past settle into something she could carry without drowning. There would be no sudden reconciliation, no tearful embraces or miraculous healing, but there would be truth. And from truth, perhaps, something new could be built. For now, that was enough. Days passed slowly, but not gently. Each new revelation Emily encountered settled heavily in her chest, and though she had finally grasped the truths she'd once craved, each answer seemed only to tear open deeper wounds. Richard Wallace's words echoed continually in her thoughts. Margaret's letters haunted her dreams, and yet none of the clarity she'd hoped for appeared. Her identity, once vague and undefined, was now a tangled web she struggled to navigate. She moved through her daily routine at Wallace and Company mechanically, a shadow in a place where she had once been invisible by choice, now invisible by necessity. Colleagues' idle conversations felt distant, meaningless. Lunch breaks were spent staring blankly into coffee cups. Evenings blurred together with restless pacing in her small apartment. One evening, as the office slowly emptied and the building descended into its usual quiet darkness, she found herself unable to go home. Instead, she wandered up to the roof terrace, a place she'd rarely visited, drawn by the open air and the glittering city below. She leaned against a metal railing, gazing over the endless lights of Chicago, the noise of traffic a distant murmur beneath her. She hadn't expected company, especially not Richard Wallace, who emerged from the shadows, as if he'd been waiting for her arrival. "I hoped you'd come up here eventually," he said, stepping quietly to stand beside her, eyes fixed forward on the skyline. "How did you know?" Emily asked, voice distant, not looking at him, because when you're searching for answers, the sky seems a fitting place to look. She sighed softly, acknowledging his words without fully accepting them. "Answers haven't helped me much so far." "I never promised they would," Richard admitted gently. "Truth can bring as much pain as healing." Emily turned slightly, looking at him fully for the first time. The man beside her appeared diminished somehow, as if time and revelation had eroded his defenses. His posture was slightly stooped, the lines around his eyes deeper than she'd remembered. "You seem tired," she said quietly. He smiled faintly, his gaze distant. "I've spent half my life chasing ghosts. It wears a person down." What if it wasn't enough? Her voice cracked slightly. What if knowing all this wasn't enough to change anything? Richard turned fully toward her, his eyes meeting hers directly. Then it wasn't. The truth is rarely a solution. It's simply the end of one road and the beginning of another. All it can promise is choice. And what choice do I have now? Emily's voice was barely audible, drowned out by the wind and city noise. The choice to move forward. The choice to decide who you are now, not who circumstances force you to become. A moment of silence fell between them, thick with uncertainty. Finally, Emily spoke again, softer this time. "You told me about Margaret's family, about the cruelty, the money, but what I still don't understand is why Margaret gave in so easily. Even her letters, they felt helpless, regretful, but why not fight harder?" Richard's expression changed, tightening with reluctance. He turned away again, staring into the night, his voice strained. Because Margaret was fragile. Her strength was quiet, hidden beneath layers of fear. She believed they would destroy me, and perhaps even you, if she defied them openly. She did what she thought was safest. Safest for whom? For everyone, Richard answered, eyes haunted. In their twisted way, Margaret's family saw it as mercy. They believed erasing you from Margaret's life, and mine was a kindness. They used Margaret's vulnerability as a weapon. Emily shook her head, anger rising. Kindness would have been to let her choose her own life. Perhaps, Richard acknowledged bitterly, but the world we inhabited then was harsh and unforgiving. Choices were luxuries we rarely had. Emily clenched her hands tightly around the railing, her knuckles turning white. You speak about choices like they're precious, but Margaret made hers. She chose fear, secrecy, silence. Those choices took everything from me. They took everything from both of us, Richard whispered. Emily's voice rose sharply, her frustration spilling over. You built an empire. You gained power. Yet you never challenged them publicly. Why? Because, he said heavily, the damage had been done. Margaret had remarried, had another life. You were gone. I told myself revenge wouldn't bring you back. I needed to build something real, something lasting. So if you ever returned, there would be a place waiting for you. Emily's eyes widened in shock. So all this company, your wealth, it was about me? Richard sighed deeply, weariness shadowing his features. Everything I built was about reclaiming the person I lost. Reclaiming you. Even if I never found you again. The weight of his admission hung between them. Emily felt suddenly smaller, crushed beneath the gravity of the realization. I don't know how to respond to that, she murmured finally, voice breaking. You don't have to. It's my truth, not yours. But it's important you know why I never took vengeance, why I stayed quiet. I was waiting for a moment that might never come. And now that it has... Now, Richard said softly, all I want is to give you the choice Margaret never had. To live without secrets, without shadows. Emily drew in a shaky breath, turning back to face the city, its lights bright and indifferent. I don't know if that's possible. The shadows, they're all I've ever known. They don't have to be, he said gently. I've carried mine long enough to know that some burdens, once shared, become lighter. A quietness settled between them once more, but this time it felt different. Less like emptiness, more like a cautious truce. Margaret died without ever being free, Emily said after a long pause. Her letters showed she regretted every moment she allowed her family to control her. Richard nodded slowly. Her regret was her prison. I carry it now, too. I don't want that kind of regret, Emily whispered. Then don't choose it, Richard urged softly. Learn from Margaret's mistakes. Live the life she couldn't. Emily felt tears rising again, but this time she didn't push them away. They slid silently down her cheeks, hidden by the darkness. What if I'm not strong enough? She asked quietly. You already are. You face the truth, something neither Margaret nor I can fully do. The rest will come if you let it. Emily looked at Richard again, seeing in his face a mirror of her own struggle. She recognized his sincerity, his vulnerability, his hope. You really believe that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I do, he answered firmly. Because you're here. Because we're both still standing. Emily's shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension draining from her body. She felt suddenly, inexplicably lighter. I can't promise forgiveness, she said softly. I would never expect it, Richard replied simply. I only hope for acceptance someday. Someday, Emily echoed quietly. He smiled softly, warmly, the first genuine smile she'd ever seen from him. Until then, take each day as it comes. She nodded slowly, turning once more to the skyline, letting the lights and noise wash over her, soothing her battered thoughts. Richard stepped back quietly, retreating toward the elevator. Just before he disappeared, she spoke again. Thank you for telling me everything, she said clearly. He paused, looking back at her with a depth of understanding that eased something within her. Thank you for listening. As he disappeared, Emily remained alone, overlooking the city. The truths had emerged, painful and jagged, cutting deeper than she'd ever anticipated. Yet within the hurt, a new clarity began to take shape. Fragile, tentative, but undeniably real. She knew now there was no going back. But for the first time, the idea of moving forward no longer terrified her. She had made her choice. Now, she only had to live it. Emily's world, once so carefully compartmentalized, now felt like shards of glass scattered across a vast floor. Some jagged, some smooth, but none fitting together in any meaningful way. She spent her mornings wrestling with the past, her afternoons lost in the hum of office routines, and her nights questioning everything she had ever known about herself. She had learned truths that shifted the foundation of her identity, but those truths came tangled with new uncertainties. Margaret's letters, Richard's confessions, and the secrets locked away for decades had painted a complex picture, but the edges didn't align neatly. The more she tried to piece them together, the more fragmented her sense of self became. One evening, as twilight deepened and the city's lights blinked alive, Emily sat alone in a quiet cafe far from the sterile glass towers of Wallace and Company. The murmur of soft jazz blended with the clinking of cups and distant conversations. She sipped her coffee slowly, letting the warmth anchor her the moment, though her mind wandered relentlessly. Her phone vibrated on the table. A message from Richard. Are you okay? I'm here if you want to talk. She stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back. Not yet, but thank you. She put the phone away, unwilling to bridge the gap between them just yet. Her thoughts turned back to the fragments of her life. The memories she had once dismissed as insignificant but now flickered like distant beacons. Childhood birthdays, the scar on her chin for fall in the backyard, the feeling of being both loved and abandoned in different measures. None of it made sense in the light of the new revelations. Her adoptive parents had been good to her in their way, but the absence of her origins had left a void too wide to fill. Questions she had never dared ask now loomed large. Why was she given away? What had they feared? Who had decided her fate before she could even speak? The answers she sought were elusive, like shadows slipping through her fingers. The next morning, back at the office, Emily avoided her usual path and found herself in the small staff kitchen, seeking a momentary reprieve. A colleague, Jason, noticed her distracted demeanor and approached hesitantly. "Hey, Emily," he said softly, "you okay? You seem off." She forced a small smile. "Just tired. Long week." He nodded, eyes kind. "If you ever want to talk, I'm around." "Thanks, Jason. I appreciate that." As he walked away, Emily felt the pang of isolation acutely. Even amidst friendly faces, she felt a chasm widening between her and everyone else. Her history was now tangled in shadows no one else could see. That afternoon, as she sifted through emails, a sudden knock on her office door startled her. It was Richard Wallace himself, unannounced, his usual guarded demeanor softened by something vulnerable. "May I come in?" he asked. She nodded, gesturing to the seat opposite her desk. "I wanted to check in," he said. "I know this isn't easy. I just want you to know I'm here. No pressure, no expectations." She appreciated his candor, but the exhaustion in her voice was undeniable. "It's not just about being here or not. It's about who I am now. After all I've learned, I don't know who that is." He leaned forward, hands clasped. "Identity is not static. It's forged through choices as much as through blood. You're more than the sum of your past." She looked down, biting her lip. But what if the pieces never fit? What if I'm just a patchwork of things I didn't choose, people I never knew? He met her gaze with steady kindness. "Then you make your own mosaic, piece by piece." The conversation lingered in her mind as days turned into weeks. Slowly, she allowed herself to explore what it meant to belong. To someone, somewhere, not by default, but by choice. One evening, walking home beneath a sky streaked with amber and violet, Emily stopped at a small park. Children played on swings, couples strolled hand in hand, and families gathered on benches. She watched them quietly, longing for a connection she had never known. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she answered. "Hey." Richard's voice was tentative but warm. "Hey," she replied softly. "Are you coming to the company event next week? It would mean a lot if you did." Emily hesitated. Social events had never been her scene, but perhaps this time could be different. "I'll think about it," she said. "Take your time. No pressure." As she ended the call, she realized that for the first time in a long time, she felt the possibility of belonging, not just as Richard Wallace's daughter, but as Emily. Not perfect, not whole, but real. The pieces of her past still lay scattered, but maybe, just maybe, she could start fitting some of them together. The invitation to the company gala had arrived a few days earlier, slipped discreetly into Emily's inbox by Richard's assistant with a simple note. "We hope to see you there." It was a small gesture, but to Emily, it felt monumental. The idea of attending a social event where the walls were not glass, but crowded with expectations, eyes, and unspoken judgments was terrifying. Yet beneath that fear was a quiet longing to confront not only her complicated past, but the man who had become an unexpected presence in her life. When the night of the gala arrived, Emily dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that felt like armor, simple yet elegant. She caught her reflection in the mirror, searching for a version of herself that could face the unknown. Her scar, the silent symbol of a childhood half remembered, was hidden beneath a stroke of makeup, but the resolve beneath her eyes was unmistakable. The ballroom was a glittering expanse of chandeliers, polished floors, and murmurs of success. Colleagues and clients mingled, their laughter a soundtrack of power and prestige. Emily stepped inside, clutching her clutch tightly, feeling like an intruder in a world that had only recently begun to accept her presence. Richard appeared moments later, dressed impeccably, his demeanor tempered with a rare warmth reserved just for her. He offered his arm, which she took hesitantly, the touch grounding her in the swirling currents of the evening. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure I would," she admitted. "You did. That means more than you know." They moved through the crowd together, exchanging polite nods and brief greetings. Emily observed the polished faces, the carefully measured smiles, the subtle undercurrents of power plays. Yet she felt oddly detached, as if watching a play unfold from behind a veil. Eventually, they found a quieter corner near the grand windows overlooking the city. The lights below twinkled like distant stars, indifferent and eternal. Emily took a breath. "I've been thinking about what you said, about making my own mosaic." Richard nodded, encouraging. "It's just, I'm not sure where to start. I've spent so long piecing together fragments of a life I never chose, try to make sense of gaps and silences." "That's understandable," he replied. "But you don't have to have it all figured out at once. Life is less about completion and more about progression." She smiled faintly. "Progression sounds easier than it is." "True," he chuckled softly. "But that's where support comes in. You don't have to face the past alone." Emily hesitated, then said, "I want to understand more about Margaret, about her life before everything. Not just what you told me, but the woman she was." Richard's expression softened. She was a paradox, a woman trapped by circumstances but bursting with dreams. She was brilliant in ways no one acknowledged, fiercely protective of you even when she couldn't protect herself. The letters you found are a glimpse of her soul, raw and honest. "I wish I could have known her," Emily whispered. "Me too." He looked away briefly, then back. "Perhaps, through you, she lives on." The thought stirred something deep within Emily, a fragile connection to a mother lost before she could be known. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar voice. Jason, her co-worker, approached with a warm smile. "Emily, you look stunning," he said, genuine admiration in his eyes. "Thank you," she replied, pleasantly surprised. Jason glanced at Richard, then back to her. "I hope you don't mind me interrupting, but I wanted to say I'm glad you're here. It means a lot to see you." Emily blinked, touched by the sincerity. "Thank you, Jason. That means more than you know." As Jason moved away, Richard whispered, "You're becoming part of this world, slowly but surely." Emily looked out over the city again, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future entwined within her. The gala was more than an event. It was a milestone, a step toward reconciliation with the fractured pieces of her identity. Later, as the night wound down, they stepped outside into the crisp air. The city hummed with life around them, a living tapestry of countless stories woven together. Richard turned to her. "I'm proud of you." Emily met his gaze, feeling a warmth that was not obligation, but something genuine. "Thank you for not giving up on me." He smiled, a rare lightness softening his features. "I never could." For the first time in years, Emily felt a tentative hope blossoming within her, a belief that the past, no matter how painful, did not have to define the future. Together, they walked into the night, two souls bound by blood and the fragile threads of forgiveness and understanding. After the gala, Emily thought the worst of the past had been unearthed, that the jagged edges of her history would slowly begin to smooth out under the steady rhythm of newfound truths. But life, she quickly realized, had a way of shattering expectations and delivering revelations when least expected. It began with a phone call one rainy afternoon, the kind of call that came without warning and twisted the narrative into something far more complex than she ever imagined. "Emily, it's Mark Dawson. I'm an attorney representing the Fairchild estate." Her heart stilled. The Fairchild name carried weight, a name shadowed by secrets and sorrow, the family that walled off her past with iron and indifference. She hadn't expected to hear from them again, certainly not through a lawyer. "We've uncovered documents that require your attention," the voice continued, calm and measured. "There are legal matters involving your biological mother's estate that pertain to you directly." Emily swallowed hard. "What kind of matters?" "Sensitive, but nothing to be alarmed about. I suggest we meet at my office to discuss in detail." The conversation ended, leaving her numb with questions she didn't yet know how to ask. Later that evening, she sat across from Mark in a modest law office, the walls lined with books that smelled of old paper and secrets. He laid out folders thick with paperwork: wills, trust funds, letters, and contracts. "Your mother, Margaret Fairchild, left provisions for you," Mark explained. "An inheritance of sorts. Financial, yes, but more importantly, documents and correspondences that shed new light on her life and decisions." Emily's mind reeled. Why now? Why after all this time? Mark hesitated. There was a clause in her will. The documents were to be released only once certain conditions were met, namely, that you were located and willing to engage. He slid a sealed envelope toward her. "This was addressed to you personally, to be opened only under these circumstances." With trembling hands, she broke the seal. Inside was a letter penned in Margaret's unmistakable handwriting, a letter filled with confessions and explanations that cast her mother's past in a new, unexpected light. Margaret wrote of a secret she had kept buried even from Richard, a truth that had haunted her until her dying day. The letter spoke of a second child, a son, born years before Emily, taken from her and given to another family in a similar clandestine adoption. A child she never ceased to mourn, a child she named James. "I had to protect him," the letter read. "His existence could have destroyed what little peace we had. The Fairchilds demanded secrecy, and I obeyed. But every day I wonder what life he lives, what happiness I denied him." Emily's mind raced. A brother she never knew existed. A sibling lost to shadows deeper than her own. The weight of that revelation crashed into her like a storm, pulling apart the fragile threads she had begun to weave together. "How? Why was this kept from me?" she asked Mark, voice barely above a whisper. "Margaret feared the consequences," he replied. "The family's influence was vast. She believed knowledge of James would endanger both you and him. It was a protective silence, tragic but deliberate." Emily sat back, the room spinning with possibilities. Her past, it seemed, was more tangled than ever. "I want to find him," she said finally. "I need to know if he's out there." Mark nodded. "We have some leads. It won't be easy, but it's possible." She looked out the window as rain traced slow paths down the glass, mirroring the tears she refused to shed. The truth she had sought was no longer a single thread, but a complex tapestry of hidden lives and stolen chances. When she called Richard that night, she spoke with urgency. "There's more. Margaret had another child, a brother." His silence on the other end was long, heavy. "I suspected as much," he admitted. "Margaret never spoke of him, but whispers lingered. I always hoped he was safe." Emily's resolve hardened. "I have to find him. For both of us." Richard's voice was steady, resolute. "Then we'll do it together. No more secrets." The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with unknowns. But for the first time, Emily felt a stirring of purpose beyond the pain, a chance to reclaim not just her own story, but that of a brother lost in the shadows. As the rain continued to fall outside, washing the city clean, Emily allowed herself to hope. Hope for reconciliation, for family, and for a future not defined by the secrets of the past, but by the courage to face them. The discovery of her brother, James, added a new layer of complexity to Emily's already tangled life. The truth, once a faint whisper behind years of silence, now grew loud and insistent, demanding action, answers, and a reckoning with a past that refused to stay buried. With Richard by her side, she embarked on a journey neither of them could have anticipated, a search for a sibling they both knew existed but neither had met. The initial steps were slow and tentative. Richard reached out to trusted contacts, private investigators, and legal experts who specialize in unearthing long-buried family secrets. Emily, meanwhile, balanced her growing emotional weight with the pressures of her job and the fragile new relationship she was trying to build with her father. The office, once a place of routine and anonymity, had transformed into a battleground for personal discovery and healing. Weeks passed, filled with phone calls, meetings, and endless piles of paperwork. Each lead on James was scrutinized and followed, a careful dance through the shadows of adoption records and sealed documents. The Fairchild estate, as expected, resisted every inquiry, the family's legacy of control and secrecy extending beyond the grave. Emily often found herself overwhelmed, retreating in a moment of solitude to process the flood of emotions crashing over her. She grappled with feelings of anger, betrayal, hope, and fear, all tangled in a web that seemed impossible to unravel. Yet amid the turmoil, a fragile thread of connection to James gave her strength, a beacon guiding her through the uncertainty. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily sat with Richard in his office, the city's lights flickering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The latest report lay between them, a cautious update from their investigators indicating a potential match for James in a neighboring state. "It's not definitive," Richard cautioned, folding the papers carefully, "but it's the strongest lead we've had." Emily nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. "If it's him, what then? How do we approach this without tearing everything apart?" Richard's gaze was steady, with patience and respect. "We don't know his story, his feelings, or even if he knows about you. We have to be careful." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock. Jason, Emily's co-worker, entered with a hesitant smile. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "I just wanted to check in. You've seemed distant lately. If you ever want to talk or need anything, I'm here." Emily felt a warmth she hadn't expected. "Thank you, Jason. That means a lot." Jason nodded, then glanced at Richard before quietly retreating. As the night deepened, Emily and Richard sat in thoughtful silence, the weight of the journey ahead pressing upon them. In the days that followed, Emily found herself reflecting on the nature of family, not just the blood ties, but the bonds forged through shared experience and trust. Her relationship with Richard, once distant and fraught with unspoken pain, began to thaw. They shared small moments of vulnerability and understanding, stepping slowly toward a future neither had dared to envision. Emily reached out to Jason more often, grateful for his steady presence in a world suddenly full of chaos. Their conversations ranged from mundane office gossip to deep reflections on identity and belonging. With him, she found a semblance of normalcy and acceptance. The investigation into James progressed cautiously. Emily learned that he had been adopted by a family several states away, raised in a quiet town far removed from the tangled legacies of the Fairchilds. Preliminary information suggested he was unaware of his biological origins, living a life shaped by different struggles and dreams. The prospect of meeting James filled Emily with hope and apprehension. She understood the complexities of uncovering family ties shrouded in secrecy, the fragile balance between connection and disruption. One afternoon, Richard called Emily to his office with a folder in hand. Inside were letters from the Fairchild estate, surprisingly conciliatory, offering limited cooperation in locating James under strict confidentiality agreements. "It seems the old guard is shifting," Richard remarked. "Perhaps they realize the futility of resistance." Emily studied the letters, a mixture of relief and caution settling within her. "It's a start." Their plan was cautious. No sudden confrontations or demands, only careful steps toward discovery and understanding. As weeks turned into months, Emily prepared herself for the possibility of meeting James. She crafted letters explaining who she was, her hopes for connection, and her respect for his life and choices. With Richard's support, she sent them through intermediaries, allowing space for him to respond on his own terms. The waiting was agonizing but necessary. One crisp morning, as autumn leaves danced outside her window, Emily received a letter in return, written in a steady hand. The words conveyed curiosity, hesitation, and a tentative openness to dialogue. Her heart soared and sank simultaneously. Richard stood beside her, sharing in the quiet victory. "This is just the beginning," he said. "But it's a beginning." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future entwined within her. The journey toward reconciliation was far from over, filled with uncertainties and challenges. But for the first time, she felt ready to face them, not alone but with family. The letter from James had arrived on a brisk morning, wrapped in plain paper and unassuming handwriting, yet its significance was monumental. Emily unfolded the pages with trembling hands, the words inside cautious but genuine, a tentative bridge extended across years of silence and separation. He wrote of surprise and confusion at learning of his origins, of the deep questions stirred by the discovery of a sister he never knew existed. He shared fragments of his own life. A childhood in a small town far from Chicago, a career as a schoolteacher, the challenges and joys of a life quietly lived. The letter was an olive branch, extending the possibility of connection without demanding it. Emily read and reread the letter in her apartment, the city's pulse humming beyond her window. For the first time in decades, a fragment of a fractured past reached toward a future filled with hope and possibility. Tears fell freely, unrestrained, a release of grief, relief, and cautious joy. Richard sat beside her, silent and steady, sharing the moment without words. The years of searching, the pain and longing etched into his soul, found a fragile reprieve in this newfound connection. Together, they began to plan a meeting with James, understanding the delicacy required to navigate such an emotional reunion. They sought to honor the complexities of his life, to approach with humility and respect, and to create a space where healing might begin. The day of their first encounter arrived with the skies streaked in gentle pastels, the city bathed in soft morning light. Emily stood nervously in a modest cafe where they had agreed to meet James, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. Richard accompanied her, offering quiet support. When James entered, the resemblance was undeniable. Shared eyes, subtle gestures, an unspoken kinship that transcended years and distance. The initial greetings were tentative, measured, a dance of emotions held at bay by caution. They talked for hours, sharing stories, questions, and laughter tinged with vulnerability. The barriers erected by time and secrecy began to crumble, replaced by a fragile trust and a tentative hope. Emily felt the weight of years lift, replaced by the promise of belonging and the unspoken bond of shared history. The mosaic of her identity, once broken and incomplete, began to take shape anew, wounded but whole, fractured but connected. In the weeks that followed, Emily, Richard, and James navigated the complexities of their newfound family, forging bonds through shared experiences and honest conversations. They confronted the pain of the past together, acknowledging the losses and betrayals while choosing to embrace the possibilities of the present. Emily found strength in vulnerability, courage in forgiveness, and peace in acceptance. The scars that marked her, both physical and emotional, became symbols of resilience rather than reminders of abandonment. Richard, too, softened, shedding the armor built over decades of loss and regret, opening his heart to the family he had longed for but feared he would never reclaim. James, once lost to silence and secrecy, found a place to belong, a connection to roots he had never known. Their story was not one of perfection or fairy tale resolution, but of real people grappling with imperfect histories and imperfect futures. It was a story of reclamation, of hope forged in the crucible of pain, and of new beginnings born from the ashes of the past. As Emily stood on the rooftop terrace one evening, gazing at the city lights, she felt a quiet contentment settle within her. The journey had been arduous, the wounds deep, but the path forward was illuminated by the bonds they had rebuilt and the love they had reclaimed. She turned to Richard and James standing beside her, their faces lit by the glow of the skyline, and smiled, a smile born not of certainty, but of possibility. Together, they faced a future, imperfect, unknown, but theirs to shape. And for the first time, Emily felt truly home.